On the morning of August 6, 1945, the people of Hiroshima began their day like any other. Streetcars moved through the city, workers headed to factories, children walked to school under a clear summer sky. Few of them knew that, high above Japan, an American bomber aircraft was approaching with a weapon the world had never seen before. In less than a minute, Hiroshima would become the first city in human history destroyed by an atomic bomb. But to understand why this happened, the story begins long before the explosion itself. By 1945, World War II had already become the deadliest conflict in human history. Germany had surrendered in Europe, but the war in the Pacific continued. Japan still controlled parts of Asia and refused to surrender despite heavy losses. The United States had captured islands closer and closer to mainland Japan, but every battle came at an enormous cost. Fighting on islands such as Iwo Jima and Okinawa showed American military leaders how fierce a full invasion of Japan could become. Tens of thousands of American soldiers had already died in the Pacific War, while Japanese military resistance remained intense even when defeat seemed inevitable. At the same time, American cities feared a long and costly war ahead. Military planners estimated that invading Japan directly could lead to hundreds of thousands of casualties on both sides. President Harry Truman and his advisors faced a difficult decision: continue conventional warfare and prepare for invasion, or use a new weapon developed in complete secrecy. That weapon came from one of the most secret scientific projects in history, the Manhattan Project. The Manhattan Project began in 1942 after fears that Nazi Germany might develop an atomic bomb first. The United States gathered some of the world's leading scientists, including physicists from Europe who had fled the war. Hidden laboratories and research facilities were built across America, including the famous Los Alamos Laboratory in New Mexico. The goal was simple but terrifying: unlock the power hidden inside the atom. Scientists discovered that splitting certain radioactive elements, such as uranium, could release enormous amounts of energy.
Albert Einstein's equation showed that even a tiny amount of mass could be converted into tremendous energy. Using nuclear fission, scientists found a way to trigger a chain reaction powerful enough to create a bomb unlike anything previously imagined. On July 16, 1945, the United States successfully tested the first atomic bomb in the New Mexico desert. The explosion lit up the sky and shocked even the scientists who created it. One physicist later recalled a famous line from Hindu scripture: "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." Less than a month later, the weapon would be used in war. American military planners selected Hiroshima as one of several possible targets. The city had military importance, including army headquarters and industrial facilities supporting Japan's war effort. Another reason Hiroshima was chosen was because much of the city had remained relatively undamaged by earlier bombing raids. This would allow American officials to clearly measure the bomb's destructive power. The bomb prepared for Hiroshima was called Little Boy. It was a uranium-based atomic bomb weighing over 4,000 kilograms. Unlike traditional bombs, which relied on chemical explosions, Little Boy used nuclear fission to release destructive energy on an unimaginable scale. In the early hours of August 6th, a B-29 bomber called the Enola Gay took off from the Pacific island of Tinian. Piloted by Colonel Paul Tibbets, the aircraft carried Little Boy toward Japan. At approximately 8:15 in the morning, the bomb was released over Hiroshima. 43 seconds later, it detonated around 600 meters above the city. The explosion instantly produced a blinding flash, brighter than the sun. Temperatures near the center reached several thousand degrees Celsius. Buildings vanished in seconds. Human bodies close to the blast were completely disintegrated. A massive shockwave moved across Hiroshima, flattening homes, schools, hospitals, and factories. Fires spread rapidly through the destroyed city. Within minutes, a huge mushroom cloud rose high into the atmosphere. Around 70,000 to 80,000 people were killed almost immediately. By the end of the year, total deaths would rise far higher due to burns, injuries, and radiation sickness. For survivors, the destruction was beyond anything they had ever experienced. Many people suffered severe burns from the intense heat. Others were trapped beneath collapsed buildings. Black radioactive rain began falling over parts of the city after the explosion. Hospitals were destroyed, doctors were killed, and medical supplies became almost impossible to find. Survivors later described streets filled with silence, smoke, and people wandering in shock with severe injuries. Thousands searched desperately for missing family members among the ruins. At first, many Japanese officials struggled to understand what had happened. Communication with Hiroshima suddenly stopped. When reports finally arrived, the scale of destruction seemed impossible to believe. The United States soon announced that it had used an atomic bomb. However, the war was not yet over. 3 days later, on August 9th, another American bomber dropped a second atomic bomb, this time on the city of Nagasaki. The bomb, known as Fat Man, used plutonium instead of uranium and caused another devastating explosion. At the same time, the Soviet Union declared war on Japan and invaded Japanese-controlled territory in Asia. Facing destruction from multiple directions, Japan's leadership became divided over whether to continue fighting. On August 15th, 1945, Emperor Hirohito addressed the Japanese people by radio for the first time in history. He announced Japan's surrender, bringing World War II to an end. For many Americans, the atomic bombs were seen as a way to end the war quickly and avoid a costly invasion. Others, both then and now, questioned whether the bombings were morally justified, especially considering the large number of civilians killed. The debate continues even today. Some historians argue the bombings prevented even greater casualties by forcing Japan to surrender quickly. Others believe Japan was already close to defeat and that alternative options should have been explored. What remains undeniable is the human cost. Hiroshima was almost completely destroyed. Tens of thousands died instantly, while many more suffered long-term effects from radiation exposure. Survivors, known in Japan as hibakusha, continued to face illness, trauma, and discrimination for decades after the war ended. Yet Hiroshima also became an international symbol. The city was rebuilt in the years after the war and transformed into a center promoting peace and nuclear disarmament. Memorials and museums now stand where destruction once covered the city, reminding future generations of the dangers created when warfare reaches nuclear scale. The bombing of Hiroshima did more than end part of World War II. It changed global history forever. For the first time, humanity possessed the ability to destroy entire cities with a single weapon. The atomic age had begun. In the decades that followed, countries raced to build larger and more powerful nuclear arsenals, leading to the Cold War and decades of global tension. Even today, nuclear weapons remain one of the greatest dangers facing the modern world. And it all began on a quiet summer morning in Hiroshima, when a single bomb changed history forever.